Hi, this is Graham from Minnetonka Audio, a part of the Telos Alliance TV Solutions Group, and welcome to this tutorial for AudioTools Workflow Editor. In this tutorial, I'm going to go into using the Workflow Editor in more detail, showing you how you can use the software to configure a workflow for loudness correcting a 5.1 plus stereo QuickTime file for R128 compliance. To begin, we need to load up a profile template that we can use as a base for the workflow. If you already have a similar workflow available in your workflow list, you could do this by duplicating the existing profile and making the necessary changes. However, we'll assume here that we'll be starting from scratch, so we'll import a new template from the Profile Template browser. To open the Profile Template browser, we either need to click on the New Workflow button or select New Workflow from the File menu. We now need to find a suitable profile for this workflow. We are only after basic loudness processing, and there are no other processing modules that we need. Looking at the list of available categories in the category list, we could start by choosing loudness workflows, as this is the most appropriate option. This brings up a further set of subcategories. As we're only looking for loudness processing, we can discount most of these, with loudness processing only looking like the most suitable. Opening this brings up a list of several possible options based on the number of programs or tracks that we need to handle. In this instance, we are looking for options with two programs, 5.1 and stereo. Therefore, the profile template we are looking for is Loudness Workflow 2 programs. Alternatively, we could use the search option, where, as we are only after loudness processing, we could enter a search term such as loudness only to bring up a list of profile matches. Going back to the profile selection, clicking on Loudness Workflow 2 programs brings up a preview in the browser preview panel. Zooming in, we can see this contains two loudness processing steps in addition to the extract and rewrap options. We can also see from the description that the workflow handles QuickTime files, so this looks good. We can therefore click on Create to load this into our list. We now need to check each of the steps to make sure that the settings meet our requirements. We'll start with the extract step, which we use to extract the required audio components from the source file. Double-click on the extract box to open the edit step window. There are two settings in the extract step that we can change: source file type and configuration. The source file type defaults to auto detect. This would mean the system would analyze the file first and configure the file type settings automatically. This would be fine here, but as we know that the source file for this particular workflow will always be QuickTime, we might as well change the setting to QuickTime, as it will save having to run a file check on any incoming files. The configuration actually defaults to 5.1 plus stereo, so there is no reason to change this. Had we been using a different configuration, we could have clicked on the configuration drop-down and selected the one we need. Only two program options are listed, as this profile is only set up for that number of tracks. Let's click on Apply to confirm the changes. Now let's check the settings of the loudness processing steps. You'll notice that each audio program has its own loudness processing step. This allows us to set different loudness targets for each track, or to disable processing on particular sets of audio, for example, if we do not want to process the M&E track. If you wanted to disable a step, you would open it up and turn off the step enable setting. With loudness steps, we could alternatively click on the processing drop-down and either select none or measure only. In this scenario, we do want to process both programs, so we'll leave both set as enabled. Going through the different loudness settings, we can see that they already default to R128 spec, so technically we don't need to change anything. If we did need to change any settings, for example the true peak value, we just go to the relevant parameter and make the adjustment. If we wanted to include loudness range correction as another example, we simply enable the LRA limiter and change the maximum loudness range to our required target. Finally, let's enable a final measurement pass, as it can be useful to verify the corrected levels. Once we have checked and are happy with the settings, click Apply to confirm the changes. Let's quickly repeat the loudness step settings for the second program. Next, we can move on to the Configure Output File Creation step, where we can check the output settings. We are writing, or wrapping, back the processed audio to the source file, so we can leave the output file type set to as source. The other options available here are WAV file or audio-only QuickTime, which may be useful if you don't want to include the video track in the output file. Bit depth we are also leaving as source as we're wrapping back to the source file. Otherwise, we could have changed this to one of the listed options. Number of programs is again left as source. A reason you might want to change this would be if the output file was going to contain a different number of programs or tracks compared to the original. For example, if we only wanted to include the stereo audio. If you're changing the audio composition on the file, you may also need to change the number of channels. We're not, so we'll leave this as source. As we're not altering the order of the programs on the file, we can leave the channel order changed option disabled. We can also see that the source audio for audio source 1 and audio source 2 are program 1 and program 2 loudness processed audio respectively, so the settings all appear to be good. It may be useful to be able to identify the processed output file from the original source, so let's make sure that amend output file name is enabled and change the suffix to be added to _R128. That way, _R128 will get added to the final output file name. Had this option been disabled, the output file would have had the same name as the source. For QuickTime files, the output module also contains some settings for handling the QuickTime channel metadata. Whether you use these is entirely optional, but let's imagine here that we do, so we'll therefore enable the QuickTime track labeling. At the moment, this would default to a mono assignment on all channels. This may be okay, but we're going to change the settings for channels 1 to 8 to those for 5.1 and stereo. There are also options here for changing the language tag applied to each program, but let's leave it set to English. Once we are happy with the changes, click on Apply to confirm. The last available step is the Generate Loudness Report step, which allows us to create a CSV file showing the before and after results. This can be a useful option for record keeping. By default, this step is disabled, so let's enable it. The report file will be saved to the location set here. Should we need to change this, click on Browse and navigate to the correct location. We can see that the report configuration and channel order is correct, so we can close this window. Next, we need to check and confirm the general workflow settings, which can be opened by double-clicking on the green circle in the title bar. The workflow settings are where we configure things like the paths used by each workflow. By default, these use the folder locations set in the Workflow Editor preferences, but you can override them in individual workflows by clicking on Browse and navigating to the location you want to use. Frame rate and program start can be useful if you want the loudness processing to begin partway into a file, for example to skip alignment tones. The program start uses an absolute timecode value. For example, if we wanted to skip the first 59 seconds of audio, we can enter something like 00005900. There are also settings for how the source file is handled, such as whether it is deleted on completion, a local copy made prior to processing, or whether it will be moved into a different folder, either at the end or in the event of an error. You can also use the workflow settings to configure whether the workflow will be used for direct file submission, where you manually select the files to be processed, or whether it will be used to drive a watch folder. Let's leave it in file mode for now and OK the changes. Now that we have configured all the settings, let's save our changes. You will notice that there is currently an asterisk symbol next to the workflow name. This indicates that the workflow contains unsaved changes. When we save the workflow, we can see the symbol disappears. Finally, let's rename the workflow to something more meaningful for us. Right-click on the current workflow name in the workflow list and select Rename. When you are happy, hit Enter to confirm. The workflow is now ready to run. We could either submit jobs directly from the Workflow Editor or export out a copy for use elsewhere. As we're in file mode, if we click on Submit, we are taken to a file browser where we can locate the files we want to run. A final confirmation window allows us to set the priority this job will be treated with by the AudioTools queue. Thank you for taking the time to check out this video. For more information or for other tutorials, please visit our website. Alternatively, email us at atssupport@minnetonkaaudio.com.